And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities, either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain though, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 61 for Monday, March 31st, 2025. My name is Jason Olborn and I'm joined now by my partner in news. Her name, Nicola Charles. Nicola, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Jason. Good morning, listeners. I'm grinding into Monday. Everything aches. I worked all weekend, and yesterday I spent some time with a whole bunch of Australians. I did a speech with the member for Monash, Russell Broadbent, and I can tell you now the vibe in the room, if politicians are looking to take the temperature on how people are feeling about what's going on, they should have rocked up yesterday. It is not good. They are not happy about Australians being locked out of that Labor public meeting in Box Hill. They are not happy about that clip of Anthony Albanese sort of poo-pooing an Australian citizen who tried to ask a question and was told you're not part of the press pack and this is not how it works. I mean, how does it work in a democracy? And then, of course, Senator Patterson has come out and called Australians who want to confront politicians about what's going on ratbag protesters. I think it's absolutely disgusting, and I think our politicians in Australia, Jason, are really out of touch and are absolutely 100% no longer representing the people of this country. So who are they working for, Jason?
You make a very interesting couple of points there. So, as usual, I scour through the various news rags that are out there. And would you believe today in the Murdoch press, and I'm going to give them a big punch in the guts a little bit later in the news bulletin, they're mentioning Q, or as they call it, QAnon, and they're having a bit of a dig there and just laying it out there. But one of the famous quotes from Q was, "Soon they will not be able to walk in the streets." So here you have Patterson coming out there and complaining, would you believe it, that they've been challenged for once. These bastards, and that's what they are, they will masquerade like they're the saviour. They all want to be the ruler. Meanwhile, another Murdoch dig later on, they're saying that the president is king in all but name, so they resent that. But when it comes to them, these also-rans, these nobodies that assume these roles because of the system of being pre-selected into a major political party is generally enough in an apathetic society to get them elected. So in other words, if you're the best Suckworth in your political party in a safe seat, you get a job for life. And there are many ordinary politicians who I know personally since before they became politicians who now hold such seats and get to masquerade like they're people holding power. I could name them, but I'm not going to give them the dignity at this point. You can certainly ask me in private who I think these no-hopers are that have got these positions of power. Some of them are ministers in the current government. And I was in the Labor Party for a few years, and I was a Labor supporter since an early kid. As young as 11, I became politically interested and fairly active. And my high school years were spent studying the Hawke Keating government through commerce and economics at school. I was right into it, went to university, signed up to do an arts degree in political science, which I got my major in. So I studied this, very keenly. I had an uncle who was involved in the Labor Party, who got me interested as well. I went to volunteer as a teenager and did a lot of work there. And I've been along to state conferences. I've been elected as a delegate. I stood for pre-selection for the seat of Greenway back in 2007 in the Rudd years. I've done a lot in the left-wing movement here in Australia. There's a lot that I know, a lot of people that I've met and spoken to personally, publicly and privately. And I'm even going to quote later on the now disgraced Bob Ellis, who was one of my people that I looked up to, a wonderful author and filmmaker and et cetera, and disgraced for different reasons. I had a private lunch with him at one of these particular state conferences around about 2007, 2008, some of the stuff that he told me was incredible. And I have spoken about it previously on this show and in many times on other shows. But specifically to do with one of Albo's policies regarding supermarkets, I'm going to bring up what Bob Ellis told me himself as a solution to such an issue when we get into that in the news. But I'm very impressed again, Nicola, by the ability of this show, yourself, of course, and the way that we're getting out there into the public and doing the work of media, but also the work that politicians should be doing as well. And I love the fact that Russell Broadbent, at 74 years of age, give or take, is out there fighting fit, representing Australia better probably than he ever has before. We had a great interview the other day on my other show, The 51st State. He was my inaugural guest, to which I was particularly honoured, as was he, to be on it. And I'm just I feel motivated that the right people are finally listening. But isn't it a big deal when finally you can feel in the Australian public this want for change? And I know that whilst you'd be given a choice of, nothing and worse, or vomit and diarrhea, or McDonald's and Hungry Jacks, we know that whatever happens in this election, by 2028, there will be a mood for change into third party in this country and moving towards 2031. Don't give up hope just because 2025 may not deliver what you want. The fact is that in politics, momentum is everything and hopelessness is inertia. And that is kind of what really hopelessness is. It's inertia in action. I know that's a tautology, an oxymoron, and that's the point. Inertia is the opposite of momentum. And in politics, it's all about momentum, and you can feel it in the air. You know what's going on, and all it comes down to is an organizational body that gets behind what's going on. And there's so much hope and promise behind what's going. And I know that change is coming. Whether or not, of course, Australia's slow to the table doesn't matter. The fact is, we're going to get there.
Well, Senator Patterson has made it very, very clear that they are literally affronted at the idea of accountability. They want no accountability. They don't want to have to answer to the people they say they represent as public servants. And they just want these positive, false, misleading, misinformation, short sort of PR bursts of, we'll give you $5 off your taxes and this, that, and the other, to keep the masses happy, right? To placate people. And it's simply not good enough. I mean, when I arrived at this speech in Trafalgar yesterday, the people from the Forest of the Fallen had turned up and stuck all their sticks in the ground to show people that had died following these mRNA injections. And it was extremely upsetting. And people have gone past inertia. People have gone past sort of checking out. People are angry. I mean, I was the MC, and I also did a speech, and during the question and answer part at the end, which of course you don't get with most politicians, certainly not from the major parties, audience members were jumping up, grabbing the microphone from my hand and saying, sorry, I'm not taking over or anything, but I just need to say something to the room. And then they would turn away from us at the front and speak to the people in the room. And I said, you know what? Carry on, do that. This is freedom of speech. This is democracy in action. I care about how you guys feel about things. And the amount of stories of harms and deaths of Australian, of economic loss. I mean, there were some very, very successful people there yesterday. And even they were telling me they had to either put their business on hold or stop working in their highfalutin jobs for 18 months. Why? Because they refused to take these injections. And a lot of them are now new listeners to this radio show. Most of them had heard of us. Some of them hadn't heard of us. So hopefully we've got a whole new bunch of people listening today. But it showed me, we've gone, it's a bit like the 7 stages of grief, Jason. They've gone through the sadness and the despair and the feeling of loss. And now they're just angry. So these politicians better look out. And I'm not saying look out like you're going to be chased down the street and physically harassed. No, that's not what's happened. And that's not what Senator Patterson is objecting to. He's objecting to Australians asking questions, Jason. So if this is what they're doing, if this is what they're saying, then I will repeat what I said yesterday in my talk. We're already a dictatorship. When you can't get accountability from your politicians, you're already in a dictatorship. They're becoming untouchable. They're needing all of this extra security. And that's absolute bullshit because no one's threatened violence. All they've threatened is accountability, and they won't give it, Jason.
No, that's right. And I just want to take note that Monday morning and at recording time here, and it's still not quite light outside, Nicola, you've dropped your first B word of the week.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, no, I just show we are in form here at the Daily Australian, and I'm delighted to hear that many people are finding out about us. And one thing I just want to say, just to sort of paint a little bit of a picture for you, when I researched the actual size of the market of shows like Sunrise and the Today Show in state markets, sometimes these numbers are quite paltry. You might only have 50,000 people watching in Sydney on Sunrise in the morning or Today Show. Like that's all it is. It's not like there are millions of people watching in these individual markets.
Well, I don't know anyone who watches those shows.
Well, certainly they must be the people that want to take the $5 a week. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, at a station like 2SM, now they didn't have, this is a radio station in Sydney, they didn't use ratings for many years, and I believe that they're trying to get back into that. But insiders have told me that their listening audience might have only been for the John Laws show that only ended last year, might have only been 1,000 or 2,000 people listening at any one time to John Laws on what is considered commercial radio. So it's a very, very small audience. Now, when we started doing this show, and that's playing within the whole censorship thing. Now, this is obviously a radio show. It's audio only, and we put pictures on it so that it becomes a little bit more palatable on social media, such as X or YouTube or Facebook or Rumble, etc. But when you add up the total viewership across our two little platforms, and mine's microscopic and yours is significant, Nicola, we might be having 20,000 people a day touching this show at the moment. Now, when you share that and when you then get involved and comment and trigger the algorithms to make it more interesting and for it to be served up onto more people's news feeds, it won't be long before 20 becomes 30, becomes 50, becomes 100. And if we're consistent, and maybe by the time we hit 100 shows, maybe that's our target. We're at 61 now. Maybe by the time we hit 100 shows, we might be getting 100,000 people touching this show every day. That is significant, and it's all about growth. And what we're
Well,
trying.
our website investor was there yesterday, and there are ways that you can do that. There are ways that you can get this out there, and that's what they're working on, and they're very clever. They're cleverer than I at that. And that's what all of these other media companies use, Jason. They use technology. We now know they use technology to make sure that they're everywhere. Well, you know what? We can use that technology too.
And the difference, of course, is that when you're listening to something that you actually enjoy, and I know that I'm getting feedback from people not just here in Australia, but around the world that are tuning in and are picking up on it. And some people are saying that they think it's the best show on the internet, which I'm delighted and thank you for such wonderful comments. And they certainly provide us enormous encouragement. And at the end of the day, just so people are aware, to put together a show like this, our combined workload, Nicola, would be somewhere around 10 hours a day between all the work that we have to do for the admin, to the prep, to the production, to everything else, and then to posting. It's just you and me. There's nobody else doing it, and but that's 10 hours of work per day that goes into it. That is an opportunity cost that you could be doing something else. But this is for us. At this point, it's a donation, a service to community. That what we're doing. But I insist that this is part of becoming paid professionals. So therefore, that we don't need to go out and work in other areas to keep it going. But at the same time, no ego here. This is not about any of that stuff. It is simply so that we can provide the best quality news show that is out there, and then we can compete, we can be credentialed, and when we turn up and challenge Rudd or Dutton or anyone else that's out there, and I'm going to name something here, I'm going to upset a few people, and this includes you, Senator Alex Antic, who won't return my emails or phone calls. I've asked you on the show numerous times, and you won't get back to me, despite promising me at the Tucker Carlson event that you would read the messages, but you're not. So if anyone's out there wants to write to Alex Antic and say, why aren't you on the Daily Australian? Because Jason is asking, the challenge is out to you, Alex, as well.
And people were mentioning yesterday, which I found quite interesting, because there's this idea of minimum basic income, and I hadn't thought of it other than economically prior, but of course it's a great control lever. People were saying that in their own cohort that one of the problems they're seeing with Australians standing up and speaking out is that there are huge amounts of people who are now retired and on government pension, and a huge amount of people who are not working and on Centrelink. And they are two huge groups of people who, though they might privately criticise what's going on with the Australian government, they won't say anything publicly and they won't say anything on social media. So that's almost already like there's a social credit score because they're afraid of losing, their government income. They won't criticise what's going on, and that's quite worrying because that's quite a large group of people. Do you want to get to those news headlines, Jason?
Yeah, look, there's plenty to get to, and let me get into it. And I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up today. I think my news bulletin's just gone on a slight different angle in terms of the way that I'm presenting the information. Maybe it's because it's Monday, maybe because I too am fired up. But let's get into it right now, and I'll let you be the judge. Murdoch Media, for whom former PM Kevin Rudd has attacked over the years, may well be threatened by Rudd's antics. It appears to be doing the bidding of the left now, or at least doing the bidding of being pro-globalist and at least anti-Trump, with its stable of writers producing daily hit pieces against the Trump administration. If it's not Daniela Elser, it's freelancer Jamie Seidel. Today is no difference, of course. The timing of the rag is reduced to attacking Trump over his successful removal of illegals from the country who are gang members, gangs now termed being foreign terrorist organisations. Murdoch's reason to make the latest headline news is that there is no due process. The US is not at war, and the president is king in all but name. As Raphael Lataster would say, okay then. Now, RFK Jr. has announced 20,000 redundant HHS employees are being cut, creating a new administration for a healthy America. The department, which includes the CDC, the FDA, NIH, will save $1.8 billion a year. Programs to be scrapped, uncovered by Doge include 61 NIH grants for California DEI and gender studies. They're gone. A $1.3 million grant for Transcendent Health, which is a pregnancy prevention program for transgender boys. Gender-affirming hormone therapy in mice. $2.5 million for structural racism studies. The UCLA burned $822,000 studying Buddhism and HIV stigma in Thailand. Meanwhile, in another lead story, 3 days after we reported it, the same rag was wheeled out another hack to attack RFK Jr. and defend Peter Marks, who was told to leave the FDA's vaccine division. To recap, Marks wrote an open letter upon his forced resignation. And so in today's paper, the headline reads, top US vaccine official Dr. Peter Marks issues chilling warning in letter as he quits in a swipe at the Trump administration. A top health expert has issued a warning about vaccine safety in his resignation letter. The top US vaccine official has issued a warning about growing misinformation in a resignation letter on Friday. Dr. Marks, who was part of the effort to roll out vaccinations during the COVID pandemic, said he had been willing to work with Kennedy on vaccine safety. And the timing. Ian Carroll, with his millions of followers and deep dives into rabbit holes, himself recently on Joe Rogan Reigniting Pizzagate, has come out with some so-called bombshell remarks and a scandal set to engulf RFK Jr. Might talk about that a little bit later. And I'll also have some more comments on Peter Marks and John Leake's rebuke, which is quite satisfying. Anthony Albanese will shift focus on the campaign to health policy on Monday with a pledge of $200 million from the federal government to redevelop a major hospital in Perth's eastern suburbs. The Prime Minister will spruik a joint $355 million upgrade to St John of God Midland Public Hospital alongside the Premier of Western Australia, Roger Cook. Just don't over-investigate COVID, Albo. Don't do it. Meanwhile, in another attempt to be returned to office using the Tony Abbott playbook, Albo is trying to convince voters that he will stop supermarket price gouging in order to fix cost of living crises engulfing Aussies. The practice of blaming someone or something else for problems of his government's own making and previous failures is why increasing numbers of people do not trust government and politicians, but fail to put a finger on why. And we'll discuss this a little bit later in the show as well. Bombshell new claims have emerged in a documentary about Shane Warne's death, which has been ruled he died of natural causes. However, anything but. Senior officials from Australia were also involved in the decision to omit pills from an evidence list. A puddle of vomit and blood was found at the scene A group of local masseurs were seen on camera leaving the villa where Warren was staying. Two women from the Lana Health Massage Parlour are believed to be the last two women to see Warren alive. It's claimed that they were interviewed by police. The parlour has since been shut down, and the Mail newspaper claims the two women were told to leave the tourist island. Warren's heart condition came to light after his death, and reports about his physical condition and weight loss have continued to fuel speculation about his cause of death. Now, the same officer who was quoted in this particular article said there was a bottle, but we don't know how much of it he took. There was also a puddle of vomit and blood at the scene, but we cleared the Comagra as we were told to do. Now, the manufacturer of Comagra claims it contains 100 milligrams of sildenafil citrate, the same active ingredient found in Viagra. And in the UK, 100 milligrams is the highest dose of sildenafil available and is likely to cause side effects. And noted side effects include nosebleeds and nausea, which obviously leads to vomiting. US President Donald Trump has said he has no plans to fire anyone after a journalist accessed a chat on Signal in which senior members of the administration discussed military operations. Trump said, "I do not fire people because of fake news and because of witch hunts." Meanwhile, Trump has said he is sure that Washington will take over Greenland and that he already has absolutely real conversations about annexing the Danish autonomous territory. And the Chinese government has issued regulations that extend the reach of the 2021 anti-foreign sanctions laws, created in response to US restrictions on China. And these are a license to steal from foreign companies, according to Rod Martin, and more on that later. Nicola.
Yeah, I actually was aware of a lot of details that are now coming out about Shane Warne, and I knew him, and so I chose not to share them. Information that came to me through a medical source in Australia a long time ago when it happened, and I think I think basically we're just fed a crock of crap. We're never told the truth, and I understand it was a difficult situation because Shane was an Australian icon, a cricketer. If you're listening from overseas, very famous cricketer, and known to be a bit of a ladies' man, a bit of a party animal, and it's just extraordinary that that they couldn't be honest, you know, because this was during a time where Shane had recently had, of course, other medical, what's the word, interventions recommended by the government, which would have made him a medical experiment. And of course, when they tell people that they're a medical experiment and then they are potentially taking other medications, and I mean anything from Viagra to an aspirin, surely as a medical experiment, there has also been no research on how that experimental medical intervention reacts with any other drug or how it reacts with certain foods. They've now discovered now that, if you put a piece of pineapple onto a petri dish that is covered in parasites, human parasites, they die within seconds. That's how powerful pineapple is. We're not pushing pineapple as an intervention, even though it turns out it's very good for you. I think, I'm very concerned that we are kept in the dark about everything because you see, I think the reason they did that was not to respect Shane's memory. It was to protect a vaccine rollout. It was so that there wasn't any fear because it was a very big celebrity name. It was to protect their investment, essentially, because we know they made lots of money from this and they want to do it again. And so this entire setup, as we know, cannot be criticized, cannot be held to account. A lot of the questions that the public might want to ask, these politicians in Australia that Senator Patterson disagrees with so much are likely to be about excess death numbers and these mRNA injections and everything that's going on. And they're just called rat bag protesters. Well, aren't you rat bag drug pushers? I mean, these politicians are liars. We know they've lied to us. We know that they're corrupt because they seem to be protecting the money and not the people. And as I said on Friday, in a UN document, it states that, even the law will not survive the fourth industrial revolution because, well, the law protects people and not the planet. And so, where do we turn? If these politicians believe that they can lie to us about fundamentally important things like this, things they've obviously known about for a while, causes of death and such. And thank God for celebrities, right? Because if it wasn't for celebrity collapse and death and celebrity Bell's palsy and, all those kinds of things that we've seen with people like Justin Bieber and, there was a politician in Australia it happened to as well. If it weren't for celebrities sort of being caught out by this medical intervention, we really wouldn't know about the silent hordes, the tens of thousands of people who were not famous, who were also affected. And, it really is starting to feel like we live in a dictatorship, in a sort of China setup, because there you're not allowed to criticize government. You're not allowed to approach politicians. It would be sort of a death sentence or life in prison, or likely you would be beaten in the streets. And is that where we're going? Because we've already seen the police in Victoria use rubber bullets on what we now know, after Senator Patterson's comment, are considered rat bag protesters. So what you're saying is that the Australian public that you're now asking to vote for you in the upcoming elections, you see as scumbags. That's what the word rat bag means. They're telling you you're just scum, you're nothing. Right? You're just a rat bag protester. Why do you think you have your say? Someone's just sent me another clip of Anthony Albanese I'm not sure where it is. Does it say where it is? Sorry, I'll turn my volume down there. That was an accident. This is typical of how press conferences work. You only get to ask questions they want to answer. Don't ask any hard questions. The person was trying to ask Albanese about housing for young people. And I can tell you now, the look on Anthony Albanese's face, he stuck his nose in the air and sneered. This is very worrying. This is not a Labour Party in Australia. This is a regime, right? This is a regime. This started when Dan Andrews went to Beijing on our tax dollars, and then we weren't allowed to ask why. This is what's happening. We're not allowed to ask why these drugs are being pushed. If we're ratbag protesters, you're ratbag drug pushers, right? And we're not going to listen to you anymore, and we're certainly not going to vote for you. So something's got to be done in Australia, Jason. Something's got to change. And I saw that yesterday. And people were having phenomenally good ideas that none of these politicians ever come up with. Ideas like charging tariffs. They were all on board with the Trump tariffs. Charging tariffs on international banks and financial organizations who seek debt for Australians, because they profit from debt. So they were saying seek tariffs for those getting Australians into debt if it's foreign or international. And then that would encourage Australian banks and institutions to have domestic debt, which is cheaper for Australians to use. And I've also been officially approached by people who want to take 3 class action lawsuits that they want me to help promote and get on board with. And I'm looking at it and thinking about it. The first one, a class action lawsuit against the government with regard to the cancellation of parchment paper title deeds in Australia. The second one, a class action lawsuit against all the private sides of public-private partnerships in energy for price gouging Australians, and the private side of public-private partnerships with regard to pharmaceuticals and health. Now, this is a very powerful tool for Australians because the only language these people speak, I've said before, is money and the law. And we've just learnt from the UN that the law is now about to be jigged and pivoted away from what's right for humans. So our time may be limited. We need to get these class actions in and have a nation that is literally pushing back against this, Jason.
There's some, pardon me, some fabulous ideas there that for class actions. And you know what? If this was talkback radio, people would be ringing up and talking about the football on any other station. And here, and here we have people that obviously are intellectually more than capable. These are wonderful ideas, and I'll just put it out there, guys. Please send this stuff to us. Whether even if you want to record a 30-seconder and say these are my thoughts. There's nothing right or there's nothing wrong. You can use a pseudonym if you like, if you're a bit worried about getting it out there. But again, the more you put behind it, nothing's going to happen to people who just voice their opinion. The only way to protect free speech is to use it. Otherwise, you lose it. But I would encourage people, send it in, whether you want to put it in print or you want to put it on voice or whatever. We'll play it and we'll get it out there. But the idea of returning parchment paper title deeds is great. A class action against what's happened to us in relation to energy, and the idea of scrutinising private-public partnerships in terms of pharmaceuticals is a brilliant, brilliant idea. A couple of points I want to make. One of them, I'll go back to Shane Warne and then I'll come back on the term on Albanese and the first capitalist socialist that I've ever seen. This bloke and the way that he snarls at people because he hasn't got a bloody clue.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just going back to an AAP fact check article from 2023. It was June 29. Kate Atkinson. Dr. Spin's theory to blames Warne death on COVID vaccines. And in it, they're saying COVID vaccines accelerate coronary artery disease, and that was Asim Malhotra, a well-known UK cardiologist.
Yep.
Of course, the fact check says false. There's no evidence to support the claim. Okay, let's park that there for a moment. This was on an interview with Hoodie and John Larter. I'm going to go down to the bottom of the article where it gets down to the bottom, and now you're going to know where we're going with this. It says here, in addition, this is the second last line on the whole article. In addition, a 2023 study found no increase in cardiac arrests following the vaccine rollout.
Right.
I can hear everyone screaming right now and throwing don't break anything. It's not, you don't need to hurt yourself over this, but this is the amount of bullshit that we've been fed for so long.
Well, they should have seen the forest of the fallen yesterday, because the amount of myocarditis, pericarditis, and death from sudden heart attacks on those polls of real Australians, and they were from the age group of 12, Jason.
Yes.
There were kids 12, 13,
Yes.
14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 25, 30. These were young people, and
Yep.
they just carked it, for want of a better description. And it's absolutely disgusting. Dr. Asim Malhotra is the number one, and was pre-pandemic, the number one cardiologist in the UK. And his father died of that. He died of a massive heart attack after this mRNA, and he started investigating it. And thank God we have a cardiologist investigating it, because he's best qualified. And what did they say? Nah, he's wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Because all of a sudden the journalist knows more because they quote a bloody politician or a
because they're
compliant doctor.
sponsored by Big Pharma.
And there's part of it. Now, it says here in the article that this particular Dr. Paratz said that cases of myocarditis and pericarditis, which were usually mild, that's a very loose term there, because how do you quantify that, have been linked to mRNA vaccines or a rare side effect. Well, here we go. I wrote to the Myocarditis Foundation in the early days of the COVID vaccine rollout, and I wanted some clarification. And it's a letter I've read out many times on air, but to paraphrase, the bottom line of the article said that this is the president of the Myocarditis Foundation in Texas said, we think it's better to take the COVID vaccine and get myocarditis than it is to get COVID. Now, I could drop 16 F-bombs on that, and I just can't believe it. And I think that'll be one day used in a Nuremberg trial against these people. This is how evil they are. But at the same time, in the letter, this person admits multiple times that they don't know enough about it, and that they said in a young person getting myocarditis, they need to rest for 6 months. COVID,
6
COVID,
months.
you get over it in 2 or 3 days if you're unjabbed and you're healthy, and probably taking a few things like zinc to boost your immune system. But this is where they're going.
Look,
it's just extraordinary.
Most people who get myocarditis and pericarditis don't know they have it. So they don't know they have it. So then they go and what's the word? They go and exert themselves, And this could be exerting yourself sexually, when you're referring to famous deaths of cricketers, right? Which is not illegal. Exerting yourself sexually, not knowing you've got something, and then, two drugs combined, and you've got a terrible scenario. You could be one of these 15-year-old kids who died of it on these poles at the Forest of the Fallen, who just went out and played soccer on a Saturday with their mates, and they dropped dead of it because they didn't know they had it. So what you're saying without saying it, you absolute fools with your junk science, is that because right now these mRNA injections, these COVID injections, I've been put back on the schedule by the TGA in Australia, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, between 5 and 12 years old in Australia, that they should get one every 12 months. Every 12 months. So then what you're saying is you should get one of these jabs every 12 months and then spend half of that year not going to school, not playing sport, and just resting. Because if we know, and we do know, that you can't know if you've got myocarditis and pericarditis, then that should be get this jab, go home and rest for 6 months. So you're losing half of your life. And this whole thing has been to cause, I believe, in my humble opinion, loss of life and loss of health. That's literally what the guy in Texas said. You cannot take children's childhoods away so that they don't get a flu. Essentially what COVID is. And all of this is a mass distraction, isn't it? From, Barack Obama, telling Americans proudly, I'm getting rid of a biological weapon of mass destruction. We're not going to be doing gain of function research in America anymore. And he was like, yes, Barack Obama is so great. Oh my God, we're so lucky. First black president. And what did he do? He told you that. He didn't tell you he'd moved the whole shebang to a lab in China with less oversight and less security in their level 4 laboratory. My mum worked in a level 4 laboratory for 37 years and nothing ever bloody leaked out of it. You're telling me that we're not going to go back to the cause of all this, the weaponization of this, and why they push so hard for people to have it? No, we're just going to deal with the aftermath of it so they can cover their tracks, because they are biological and technological terrorists. That's the word they don't want you to use. That's the thing they never want you to get to, is that they deliberately cause this for whatever reason. And the crazy thing is, if a president like Barack Obama was in the background allowing gain of function research, which had been internationally ruled out by these biological weapons treaties, then Australia is doing business with China. Right. And I know that they're trying to have a war with Russia. But why do you think America was developing biological weapons of mass destruction? Right. Why are you still doing business with them? Why don't these other countries want to know why America was developing biological weapons of mass destruction? They like telling us about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and why they went and killed 1 million innocent people who had nothing to do with it. But we're not allowed to talk about the biological weapons of mass destruction that you've done and caused the whole world to be dying and sick from. It's bloody disgusting. Everyone should be confronted with these forests of the fallen. And I note, very importantly, that the Forest of the Fallen is never featured on mainstream media, Jason.
Never, never, never. Now, on this particular fact check, and I'll wrap it up at this point, they conclude that the death certificate read that he died from coronary artery atherosclerosis, or the hardening of the arteries. In other words, they removed the pills. They didn't report what was going on, and they therefore let the coroner come up with, oh, well, we looked inside, there was hardening of the arteries, and that's what caused it, and that's the end of it. So this is what I would call scientific fraud. It's a fraud of multiple authorities. And of course, it shows you that the fact check, playing with their facts, this is what they do. They just obfuscate facts. They remove what they don't want to touch on. And whenever they get to say it, they go, oh, no evidence, lack of evidence. They just get to do it. So this is the art form of what's going on. It's exactly how politics is played. There's a number of different stories that we can go into about politics. But I'm going to read you now John Leake's part of his comments on the removal of Peter Marks, who was forced to resign from the FDA, who was in charge of vaccines over there. And I think it's very apt. And I want to make a comment also about Albanese as we move on. There's a lot to get through. So Leake wrote, inoculation with a weak form of disease-causing matter to prevent serious illness is a charming idea that has exerted a powerful hold on the human mind since its first primitive iteration against smallpox, called variolation, was proposed in England and the British American colonies in the early 18th century. After Edward Jenner published his 1798 pamphlet in which he proposed using cowpox to inoculate humans against smallpox, the idea of inoculation became the central concept of infectious disease medicine and has remained so ever since. A serious student of the history of vaccination will observe that this public health technology has always been more of a matter of wishful thinking, faith, and commercial enterprise than unbiased scientific inquiry. The whiny resignation letter of Peter Marks, Director for the Centre for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the FDA, is a catechism. That is, a series of fixed answers or precepts to use for instruction in other situations. Marks is a defender of the vaccine faith, and his resignation letter reminded me of counter-Reformation pamphlets of the 16th century that asserted the rectitude of Catholic doctrine and the error of Protestant Reformation doctrine. Every statement in Marx's letter is a mere assertion, an article of faith. He says, "I rejoice at the news of Marx's departure, which will have a salubrious and rejuvenating effect on the entire department. Health and Human Services will never make a contribution to fostering health if its top positions are filled with ideologues whose primary function is the maintenance of orthodoxy. The agency needs men and women of true intellect and imagination to ask fresh questions and look for answers in places that orthodoxy has made a zone of forbidden knowledge." They are wise words.
Yeah, and it was Senator Rennick that posted that clip of Anthony Albanese not interested in the housing crisis in Australia, and I'm trying to find that clip so I can share it on X.
Well, whilst you're doing that, Nicola, I want to read two great quotes from very famous world leaders on socialism. And this is the point. Albanese, as we learnt from that particular Box Hill scenario where he excluded people, said that the Chinese CCP, which clearly that's what it was all about, was in there in this left-wing movement, because Penny Wong's from the left faction. Daniel Andrews is related to the CCP almost by blood these days. So here's what Winston Churchill said about socialism. "Socialism is the philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries." And Ronald Reagan said it, "Socialism only works in two places, heaven, where they don't need it, and hell, where they already have it."
There is a famous quote, I forget who said it, about socialism, that I think it was Margaret Thatcher, actually. She said that eventually the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. So it's, it can't work. It's a zero-sum game. We always end up at this point where everyone's ticked off and wants to know where the money has gone. And of course, there's always this massive transference of wealth, because the people who advocate for socialism, which is basically us all having nothing, they have an awful lot. It's not coming from a guy who's living out the back of a trailer, down near the river, who's saying, we should all live with nothing and basically be a big, hippie colony. It's always from very, very wealthy people. So it isn't even really a legitimate concept, socialism. It's sort of a rampant elitism masquerading as something for the people. That's how I view it, because the Bill Gateses, the Anthony Albaneses, the George Soroses, and the Clintons, they won't be losing wealth, they'll be gaining wealth. So it's a practice what you preach scenario. They're not living it, they're not prepared to live it, they will never be prepared to live it, but they expect you to live it. Do as I say, not as I do.
And it's always been the case that they want to have this idea of egalitarianism and equality in society, but they always want to remove themselves and escape that particular society. So they want to have a two-speed economy, a classed economy, a hierarchy, and there it is. It's always a hierarchy. And this is the age of Pisces on its way out the door, and ushering in the age of Aquarius, the horizontal dissemination of information. It's very clear. So what you have, it's the same old drama triangle: persecutor, victim, and rescuer. It's always the same thing. We've talked about it. I talked about it with Russell Broadbent in that interview. Please check it out on X, the one for the 51st state. Now, I just want to make a quick mention of that, Nicola, a bit of self-promotion. I've secured Michael Yon, the well-known military expert, former SAS soldier. He's going to be part of my interview on my next show on the 51st state. And in the following week, Senator Rennick is going to come on with Dr. Chris Neal as part of my Australian segment. And also, I'm going to feature Lionel Nation, who's somebody I've been following for at least 6 or 7 years, a wonderful lawyer and commentator out of New York, who's agreed to come onto the show. That will be just one of the great conversations that I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. And they'll be coming up on the 51st state. Meanwhile, a couple of comments I want to make. One is about this Ian Carroll story with RFK Jr. and the idea of yet another scandal engulfing yet another Trump administration.
Can I just
official.
first read out some comments? I posted the short clip of that Forest of the Fallen in Trafalgar. I want to read out, in case people aren't on social media, they're not on X, just some comments anonymously from Australians. As we call it genocide for a reason. Where is justice for these victims? This is pure evil. What will it take for Australia to rise up? Where do you post? Where are you speaking next? We need to stop paying taxes and stop complying. This is such madness. Remember the hysterical response to the strawberries with needles. Yet with this mass death, nothing. It's interesting, isn't it? And then there's some quite serious language about what's going on. Will not vote for either major party, federal, state, or local ever again until we get answers for this corrupted F up. When does justice catch up with this catastrophe? Obviously these politicians in Australia, Jason, they are not interested in any kind of litmus test of how people feel. It used to be that we would have these focus groups where they could gauge their own popularity in a private session, and people would take polls and they'd say, no, they're not popular about that, you need to pivot on this policy, and etc. It is now clear, Jason, that these parties in Australia, they don't care. If the focus group says everybody hates you, nobody wants that policy, you're likely to get voted out because of it, they don't care because they're doing the bidding of someone else.
Well, there it is. I'm going to quote a Midnight Oil song, US Forces, when Peter Garrett sings, "People too scared to go to prison." I'm not encouraging people to get something to get pardon me, to go to prison. But I'm just going to say that that's the point here, that people these days are too scared to write a comment on social media, for goodness sake, because of their dependent on government incomes to do so. So that just shows you how far we've fallen. It shows you how the system makes you dependent on it. And we just remember people like Gandhi, Mandela, Imran Khan, David McBride, Julian Assange, all people who've gone to prison for their principles and to fight it out. So we do need people that are not afraid to be able to do that. And of course, all of these people are or have affected change in their countries, including here in Australia. Julian Assange has done more. Julian Assange, one day we will get a pardon for Julian Assange out of the US administration, I hope, and that will pave the way for Julian Assange to become the first president of a Republic of Australia. That is my political romantic story for the day. I want to make this comment on RFK and Ian Carroll, and I'm sick to death of the Ian Carroll black pill bullshit that keeps coming out.
You used to like him. I thought you liked him.
Yeah, but what I'm sick of is the fact that they keep harping on these things that are of no relevance. I don't understand what the point is of attacking RFK. And this is the point. I think it's just for followers. I'm going to make this point about Kennedy. This is all I want to say. Robert Kennedy Jr., his father was murdered, and he uncovered the facts behind it, which he talks about openly, and it wasn't as clean cut as they said. That's why we're waiting for the RFK files to come out. RFK Jr.'s uncle was the president of the United States, JFK, and was also murdered, and now we know it wasn't what they told us it was.
But they're saying he's a bad person because of sexting, right? This is what they do. They go after you for being, for being sexual, right? Because unfortunately, this is what, adult Homo sapiens are. They're sexual. Now, we're told we can celebrate sexuality if it's if you're gay, right? If you're gay or trans, you can celebrate all the sexuality you want. But if you're straight, don't you dare be caught sexting. Let me just say, in Robert Kennedy Jr.'s defense, if I were running in politics and they went through the text messages between myself and my husband, I would be on the front page of a newspaper going, oh my God, they're sexting. She's a terrible person. Why? Because I love my husband and I'm a functioning adult, but I'm straight, so I don't get to celebrate that. That's what's going on here. It's just rubbish.
So what they're trying to allege, though, that the man's compromised. There is no way in the world that a man that comes out and says, I've been praying for 22 years to get this job, I stood for president, I'm prepared to die for the cause, but I'm compromised because of a sexting allegation. It's just
Candace
crap.
Owens went after him, Jason, which really surprised me.
But this is again the point. Candace Owens is trying to remain relevant. Candace Owens did that huge expose story on the wife of Emmanuel Macron, and it kind of went nowhere. And so she's becoming more and more on the fringes in terms of this. So go after RFK, Candace. All it does is it just shows that you're looking in the wrong direction. If a man loses his father and his uncle to murder at the hands of a rogue government and gets himself into government, and you're going to say he's compromised, you're an effing imbecile. That's what I'm going to say, and that's the end of the story as far as I'm concerned.
I think it's really odd that someone as clever and, excuse me, well researched as Candace doesn't go after the likes of Hillary Clinton, doesn't go after the likes of George Soros. Maybe she has in the past, I'm sure she's touched on it, but I just thought that Candace was on our side, right? I thought she was a Christian conservative like me. And look, you could say like me, she's trying to hold everyone to account, but sexting is not holding people to account. There are people out there who are, in office and they're pedophiles and they're being protected, right? These are actual crimes. Sexting is not a crime, being an adult, straight human being. It's weird. I've got to say, I was out and about yesterday. I just finished my speeches and people were sending it to me. And I kept waiting for the punchline, right? That it was something devastating. And that Ian Carroll guy was saying, America's never going to be the same after today. And I was thinking, shoot, this is quite the scandal. But then we never really got to the punchline. And I'm like, but this is a nothing burger. That's what you're selling us. And it is a bit disappointing. So I don't know what's going on with Candace. I don't think it's as simple as remaining relevant. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how this plays out. But a bit disappointed, yeah.
So I want to get into the Greenland story, and I want to quote Rod Martin, who I often quote. Now, Rod's a successful businessman, CEO, etc., and he puts together some brilliant threads on X, and follow him at Rod D. Martin. I believe that's what it is. You'll be able to find him. Certainly look on my page at Jason Q Citizen 1. And Nicola, so I don't get it wrong again, it's all bite, no bark 88, right?
I'm so sick of you getting it wrong, Jason. Sort yourself out.
I know. I think I got it right, and it is on the cover of every single video that we put out there. So Rod's written a story about Greenland, and he said Denmark has failed to invest in Greenland's people, security, and infrastructure. 57% of the population is under the age of 40. They need jobs and opportunity. Trump gets it. He said, we need Greenland for international security. He says it's not just about America, it's about stopping Russia and China and promoting global peace. And here's the plot twist. Denmark tried blocking Second Lady Usha Vance's visit to attend Greenland's national sled dog race, calling it unacceptable pressure. And Rod says, what are they scared of? China and Russia are expanding their Arctic presence while Denmark sleeps at the wheel. There's a reason Greenland wants independence from its European colonial overlord, but just 57,000 Greenlanders will never be able to resist China and Russia. So VP Vance's real message: the US is ready to step up where Denmark has refused. All the benefits of independence with none of the costs. For Greenland, massive investment and a future at home for its young people. For America, it's not politics, it's security. The US plan: an independent Greenland with a free association compact like Micronesia, Palau and the Marshall Islands. More resources, environmentally friendly development, huge investment in jobs, military icebreakers, and expanded naval presence.
Do you realise how important this story is, Jason?
It's massive.
For Australia. Okay, so Greenland, this is funny. When I learnt this at school, I couldn't believe it. So Iceland is green and Greenland is covered in ice. That's the difference between them. It's so weird. Iceland is green and Greenland has ice. Why they decided to name those countries that way, I don't know. But because it's covered in ice, it is very limited, as you say, for job opportunities. Now, from what I've heard through my European grapevines, the people of Greenland want this. They want to be able to sort of be absorbed by America. And as you say, the comments are coming out about shaking off the shackles of their European overlords. I think they're probably all about to get jobs at military bases and installations, and that's a fabulous thing to do in the ice. We've seen many movies over the years of that. Really is the only employment when you live at these poles and in the middle of the ice, is you're taking care of weather stations, you're taking care of military installations, and quite frankly, I'd find that quite an interesting job if I didn't hate the government. Already on a list, definitely on it now. But what I'm saying is, this is so important to Australia, right? We're in a very similar position because of our Asia Pacific geological location, and because we are being absolutely slaughtered, quite literally, by our Commonwealth overlords. We're in a very similar situation. I want to shake off the shackles of the Commonwealth overlords now, because they are what's the word, they're not, they're incapable of running this country and protecting its people, and not treating it like a cheap hooker and just using up all its resources. And so I think this Greenland story is very, very important for Australia. And I'm starting to think, and perhaps this is why it's all happening. I don't know. Nothing makes sense in Australia, but I'm starting to think it might be better off for Australia to become an American colony than it is where we currently are. So I'm watching Greenland covered in ice with bated breath, Jason.
It's very interesting because Australia is technically the servant to three masters. We have a Union Jack on our flag with a globalist king that's more interested in Ramadan than the Church of England. We are part of an AUKUS pact, which means that we have a military alliance with the US. And of course, we draw most of our interest and support, etc., out of the US. We're more American than we are British. And of course, our largest trading partner is China. So how can you have an AUKUS agreement to defend against China, but then trade with China and give them very friendly terms? And of course,
Exactly.
globalism is built on the concept of free trade. That means that the third world, through manufacturing, becomes Earth's factory. And that's where the advantages come from. So the West has given up that particular strength to go in a different direction. So what did tariffs do? They changed the structure, and the way that Trump has structured them is to create manufacturing back on US soil, which creates jobs for US citizens. And that's the purpose of it. So when you change that up, it weakens China, and obviously it weakens India at the same time. So, of course, Rod Martin's right onto it. And he's just discovered that this new headline, that what happened in China is that they've changed these rules in terms of your patents and your trademarks and your tech. All is fair game now for the CCP. So if you're Microsoft or Apple, Tesla, any company doing in business in China, their intellectual property can actually now be seized overnight with no warning, no appeal. But what China can't afford is a trade war. They're literally shooting themselves in the foot with a bazooka. Only the US, argues Martin, that has real sanctioning power globally. The EU is weak, and China knows it, and they're terrified of US sanctions, but they're not going to let you know about it. Now, he says, remember the Missouri lawsuit over COVID? The state won $24 billion in damages, and now they're seizing farmland owned by China. So China's tantrum response is this, except they're going to make things 100 times worse. Foreign companies are already fleeing China because of these new rules, and it just turns out there is an exodus, and it's turning into a stampede. And the math is simple for these big companies investing in China. If you stay in China, you risk everything. If you leave China, you'll survive. The laws were meant to protect China from sanctions. Instead, they've given every foreign company the final push they need to get out. So China's in big trouble, and the whole military flexing that they do is a facade not to be threatened by China. And what's really interesting about what's going on here is that the relationship that everyone's afraid of between Trump and Putin changes the world in a very different way. What we're seeing is globalism has now walked back the idea that it can no longer penetrate the United States under a Trump administration. They realize that this is their mortal enemy. They needed to collapse it, and they were to achieve it, in the words of Gavin Ashenden, through Islamic immigration, the globalists themselves, so the WEF, and the Marxists came together. And as Gavin said on my show back on TNT days, he said they're working together to achieve a foreign goal, a common goal of collapsing the United States. But if they are able to achieve it, then they're going to turn on each other. So this is the thing that they'll never be able to do, because there is no way that if you have a powerful Islamic nation taking over the West, that they're going to secede to the globalists or the Marxists. They're going to want to surge ahead with what they're doing and introduce Sharia law, which we're already seeing in parts of the UK. So that thing has to collapse. So what Trump is doing in the alternative is not just creating Fortress America. He's offering an expansion. So here's where it gets really powerful. Each country in the world can voluntarily decide to join an American alliance and technically become the 51st state, but maintain all their sovereignty and all their integrity and all their identity. It is exactly the experiment that he's doing with Greenland. And
Yeah,
you're
but
exactly
only if the Republicans stay in power, Jason.
yeah,
If
but
we all get on board with America and then the Democrats come back, we are finished.
yeah, but the thing is, they can't come back. That's the point. Once you have an Australia, once you have a Greenland, once you have even a Canada or anyone like that, and
New
everyone's
Zealand.
flourishing, even in New
Mm.
Zealand, no one in America is ever going to vote a Democrat again. Who are they going to put up?
Mm.
It's impossible. This is the point. What they are building now is a brand new. This is the way forward. We don't go back. As we say in our opening, there is no status quo.
I
We're either
feel
going to
like
go.
King Charles III at some point, and if it hasn't happened already, is actually going to sail off into the sunset away from the UK as it burns behind him. That's how willing he is to destroy the society of the United Kingdom. And as a Brit, it breaks my heart. Jason, we're getting towards the end of the show. What would you like to say before we go?
If the rest of the week is as good as today's show, we should have 1 million followers by Friday.
If you do say so yourself. These are really important subjects, and we could literally talk about them for hours and hours. And I wish we could, but like all the other Australians, and fair enough, we've got to go out and earn our cross so that we can eat this week. I would like to thank you all for listening to the Daily Australian. Thank you for your feedback online. Thank you for continuing to be citizen journalists. I wouldn't know about half of this stuff if it wasn't for you guys. And thank you to the new listeners who I met yesterday in Trafalgar. I hope you're enjoying the show and it's what you were expecting. You're absolutely gorgeous people who love and care about their country. And I felt quite emotional meeting you all. This has been the Daily Australian with myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olborn. We will do this all over again tomorrow.